Hi, my name is David. I'm a French student, and I wanted to share some eerie things that happened to me and to some of my friends with you readers. My grandfather died last year. He was a total atheist and believed that supernatural was just some bullcrap, and that people who got interested in it were pitiful fools. What's more, he was a convinced internationalist communist and often led some speeches against God and the church. I was the contrary of my grandfather, a conservative Christian loving God in fatherland, so this situation often led to arguments between my grandfather and me, as we're obviously on a different wavelength, but it didn't matter. He was my grandfather. I was his grandson. He loved me, and I loved him as well, and we would often laugh together. Well, as a Christian believer, I believe and still believe in hell, and I feared that my grandfather would go there after his death because of his resolute anti-God feelings. So I said a lot of rosaries so that God would put him on the right way. One day, as I went back from the university, I got a phone call from my mother. She told me that my grandfather had been sent to the hospital in order to cure a little pain in the knee, but when the doctors started to inspect his general state of health, they found out that my grandfather had a generalized cancer, and that is why he felt so tired. I got so upset hearing that I rushed to the church and put a candle to the Holy Virgin so that she would get the forgiveness to my godless, communist grandfather. I went to visit my grandfather in the hospital, where he was sadly ending his life, and I could notice no changes in his mind and moral, and his Calvary in the hospital bed lasted for months. Here's the moment when my story becomes interesting. In my prayers, I would always ask the Holy Virgin to save him and let me know by a sign that she had taken him to the right place, near the God and far from hell. It was an ordinary night. I was reading in my bed with my bedlight and listening to the outside noises as usual, and I closed my eyes to sleep afterwards. Oh God, I can never forget what I lived this night. It was about 5 a.m. because it happened just a moment before I woke up. I had a very powerful dream, and it looked so real that it is still sculpted in my memory. I dreamt about a giant curtain of red velvet with a portrait of my grandfather hanging on it. I looked at this picture and my eyes looked leftwards and saw that the curtains were open like on a theater. Behind these velvet curtains, I could see the sky filled with orange clouds, lit like on a wonderful sunset or dawn, I don't know. And suddenly, I saw a boy kneeling in the darkness in front of the scene, and I recognized myself. I can't figure out why, but I know that the boy in this dream kneeling was me in person. A short moment after, a young woman went out from behind the curtain, from the lit side. She had a blue dress and a blue veil. Both were blue, one dark, the other clear. She looked like Raphael's Holy Virgin in the painting. I remember her peaceful face that made me feel peaceful and tranquil. The lady sat in front of the kneeling boy, me, and started talking to him. I would see the lady's lips moving, but no sounds coming from her mouth. But I distinctly remember her beautiful eyebrows. After talking, she showed me something behind her. It was a ladder, a beautiful multicolored ladder that went in the orange clouds. The ladder went through a hole in the clouds, and this hole had incredibly powerful light coming right from it, and it throwed rays of light. It was noisy like a storm, though not frightening at all, not at the contrary. My dream stopped with this vision of delight. I'd forgotten the dream on the following morning and went downstairs for the coffee. My mother was standing in the kitchen, and her eyes were painful. As I held my cup, she told me that my sister called from the hospital and that my grandfather passed away. I was waiting for this event with pain, but I got psychologically ready. Anyway, tears began to go out from my eyes, and I began to cry and go in the garden to think. And as I was walking through the trees in my garden, I suddenly remembered that strange dream of the night. And I was thinking that it was the sign I was waiting for, and that I beseeched the Blessed Virgin to send me. I was so grateful. I went to the church and told the Holy Virgin thank you. But I wasn't expecting such an intervention, but another prayer of mine had been made. However, if you're thinking that this story is going to be about light and positivity, you thought wrong. Because one day, a few days before the funeral, I was visited by a spirit with horns. That's right. I was lying in my bed asleep when the door slightly opened a little bit, and I was greeted by this creature, this horned figure. It was definitely a black mass, but it was just standing there as I was trying to regain consciousness in the middle of the night. It stared at me with its red glowing eyes. That's all I remember, the dark outline of this dark mass and the horns protruding out of its head. It was there for about 40 seconds, and I'll never forget the sight, and it just slowly disappeared. I have no idea what connection this is to my grandfather, or even if it means something, but it definitely rattled me to my core. I started to get a lot less sleep, and on days that I would get sleep, I would have these terrible nightmares of the same horned figure. In one of those dreams, the horned figure would be seen off into the distance, with again those glowing red eyes, and there would be candles scattered about, with the only source of light coming from the candles. They were all lined up row by row and in a line that eventually led to this horned figure. I remember waking up instantly after that dream and crying profusely. I yelled out to my grandfather. I said, "Please save me from these nightmares. I'm sick of these nightmares." Fast forward a few days after the funeral, and the most spectacular thing happened, though it was a little unsettling, not even going to lie. And I feel like this was truly confirmation that God was answering my prayers. We have this massive full-body mirror that rests in the living room. This is where I saw my grandfather in the mirror, standing right behind me. It happened so fast, and it disappeared so quickly, that I had to regain my composure and not freak myself out too much, because I knew deep down inside that my grandfather was here to tell me it was okay, and that I shouldn't fear evil. Was it a possibility that I was so distraught over losing my grandfather that I thought I was losing my mind in the process, and I was just imagining everything that I was seeing? I don't know. I can see why people would think that after this story, but what I do know is that I contacted my grandfather and maybe some unruly spirits, maybe deep below the surface, that we can't always reach. And it's truly terrifying, but also comforting to know that my grandfather has my back, even in the afterlife. One early morning, I'd been sitting in my family room, reading the newspaper. It was a very quiet morning, and I was all alone. The sun was coming through a bedroom window off the family room and shining down the hallway. It was one of those extremely bright sunrises, the kind where you can see dust particles floating through the air. I glanced up as I was turning the newspaper page. I then saw in the sun rays the outline of what looked like a man. It had a light black to gray color. It had no details, just the outline of its body. It was about 3 feet off the floor and had no legs from around the knees down. I could see the arms. It had no hands either. I just remember telling myself, wow, it's a ghost, and I took it all in. I told myself not to turn my head or blink. The ghost appeared to be looking into the bedroom. It turned its head slightly to the right. At that point, I had to blink. My eyes were drying out. When I did that, it was gone. I then got up and put my hands through the spot where it was. I guess I wanted to see if it would be cooler or something, but it was the same temp. I just stood there in amazement of how cool that was. I also needed to add, it was no one's shadow, and it's hard to describe, but it was not a shadow. I could see the dust particles going through the figure, and the figure was in the middle of the hallway. It was 3-dimensional. It actually looked like a hologram. I really love those rare ghost encounters. My parents bought a house in Newburgh, North Carolina in 1970. It was a brand new home in a new neighborhood. I lived in this house with my parents and younger sister until I went to college in 1994. The house was a 3-bedroom, 2 full bath ranch with a carport. Before I was born, my father enclosed the carport and turned it into a large den. The original steps, carport door frame, and window frame remained and led up into our kitchen. It was an interesting layout because you could look through the open window frame from the kitchen and see into the sunken den, or vice versa. The bedrooms were on a long hallway at the back of the house. The hallway could be reached by 2 doorways, the kitchen and living room, actually one big circle. The first bedroom in the hall faced the street. The bathroom was next, another bedroom, and then my parents' bedroom at the end of the hall. The room next to my parents' room was mine until my little sister was born. I was 5 years old. I was moved down to the first bedroom. This room gave me the creeps. The closet door would slide open a bit on its own, which my parents said was probably a draft from the heat or air conditioning. However, after someone broke into my bedroom window while I slept and stole a few things from my room, I never stayed in there again, usually sneaking into my little sister's room and sleeping with her or sleeping on my parents' bedroom floor. I constantly slept with the bathroom light on and a bright night light or lamp. I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear odd noises that made me feel paralyzed and cold all over. One would think these irrational fears would subside with age, but they seem to intensify over the years. One recurrent incident that still bugs me occurred in the kitchen, den area. Whenever I would be sitting on the couch watching TV, I would see the silhouette of a person walk by the window frame from the old carport. I would assume it was my mom or dad because the shape was tall. What would scare me to death was the fact that no one would appear at the door leading to the steps after I would see the shape walk by. Many times I would call out to my parents, thinking it was one of them, but no one would answer, and then I would walk up the steps and look into the kitchen. There was never anyone there. Most times, this would happen when I was home alone. On numerous occasions, my parents would come home to find me sitting on the front porch steps or sitting in my car with the doors locked. This went on for years, and I was very excited when I moved out to go to college. Years later, I went to visit my little sister and stayed with her in her college dorm room. We were telling ghost stories with some of her friends. When I told her my accounts of the shadow, I was in mid-sentence when my sister finished my thought and described the incident in perfect detail. I had never told my sister about this because she was much younger and I didn't want to scare her. Needless to say, we were both shocked and had goosebumps. We compared stories, and it seems we had very similar experiences in that house. My parents eventually built a new house about 10 miles away and sold that house. I wonder to this day if the new owners have ever experienced any of the oddities that my sister and I did. I'm 28 years old now. The paranormal has always interested me, but only recently have I started to research it. I've come to believe now that some things I've experienced as a child were probably more than nightmares. I believe my encounters were that of the paranormal, edited with a touch of child's imagination. Contrary to what you might believe, I think my touch of a child's imagination is what scared me the most. I decided to share with you those experiences that could be considered nightmares for your entertainment, but also those that I truly believe are paranormal. At the age of 5 to 7, I can't recall for sure. One night, I was lying in my bed, asleep. I felt something moving at the bottom of my bed, and the next thing you know, I felt like I was being dragged out of my bed. My covers had tightly wrapped themselves around my legs, so tight that I couldn't move them. I yelled, "My bed is eating me! Help! Mommy, Daddy, help!" By the time it stopped and parents got into the room, half my body was hanging off the side of my bed, while the other half was hanging on for dear life. You know what my parents' response was? "That's what happens when you don't fix your bed every day. Your bed eats you." No, really, I still never fixed my bed after that. I disproved that theory fast. It never happened again. I look back now and realize that whatever it was in that house had a weird and somewhat morbid sense of humor. Check it out. Several other times, I would wake up from a rather deep sleep, turn over, and open my eyes, as if something told me, "Wake up, Steph." Sure enough, I would open my eyes, and one of two things would be sleeping next to me. A, Bo Duke. He was like a hero to me at the time. Or B, an orange mummified witch with a cone-shaped hat and empty eye sockets. Now, you would think waking up next to Bo Duke saying "Hi, Steph" would be cool as all heck, but no. I would freak out, jump so high I would fall off my bed, and thump, and run to my mom's room screaming, "Bo Duke is in my bed, help." It was way more dramatic when I saw the witch. Now, here's what really makes me think it was actually a spirit playing games with me. As I got older, about 10 years old I would say, the occurrences were not so graphical. I would still hear a voice say, "Wake up, Steph." I would open my eyes and see a pitch black silhouette of a man standing in the far corner of my room, about 6 feet tall. I would blink my eyes a few times. He was still there. I would pull the cover over my head and then peep out. He was still there. Of course, I then freaked out and ran to Mommy's room screaming, "The boogeyman is here to get me. Help, Mommy, the boogeyman is here." This would happen several times a month, for a good year or so it seemed. The last occurrence was years later, when what believed to be the same silhouette mentioned above ran across my room. First, I saw a blur run down the hall to my left and stop at the middle of the wall near the footboard of my bed. It took a moment for it to take shape, but it was definitely the silhouette of a human. I started to dart, and the moment I moved, it darted towards the other wall and vanished. I freaked out and flew to my dad and told him that there was someone in my room. Years later, when I was old enough to understand, my dad told me of the ghost of an old lady that dwelled in the house. She was a nice, but sometimes grumpy old gal. However, that doesn't explain the man that was in my room. I still can't figure out if the Beau Duke witch thing was truly a nightmare, or a spirit messing with my head, using the touch of a child's imagination. I've been to Gibbs Bridge twice, and we have seen something every time. The first time the signs kept changing. There would be a lot of writing on the signs, or none, every time we came around. I looked back and thought that someone was messing around with us, and I saw a figure standing alongside of the road, ran by the guardrail, and disappeared. Then, I kept seeing something black out of the corner of my eye. My cousin was with me, and she started to scream, and me and her both heard moaning over her screaming. Then, it was me and my sister and her friend. The signs again kept changing, but only a few, not at all like last time. We took pictures and got orbs. Then, we saw a figure again by the sign and disappeared. We went all the way down the street and turned around and saw a big bright light. I told my sister it was probably a car, so flash your lights to let them know that you're coming. She did that, and the light was gone. It kind of looked like a motorcycle light with handlebars. I know the whole story about it. Then, we turned around again and saw it again. It was not the street light at all, because we turned around going back to the bridge about 10 to 15 times. It only showed up about 3 times. The weirdest part of that night was we left, and my sister's phone was in the center console. Nobody was touching it. Somebody that we know called us and wondered why we called. Nobody did it. It was in the center console the whole time. My sister looked down and saw her phone hanging up, and they said we left a message. It was all 3 of us talking, and it was muffled. Tell me what you think, and go out there sometime again. Thanks for reading my story. Back in the early 90s, a wealthy family who lived in Corona owned 2 homes. One large home they owned was on the south side of Corona, overlooking the 15 freeway. The other home, used later as an office, was the old in-town district on Corona's famous Grand Avenue. As the story goes, before the husband and wife met and got married, the husband lived in the large house on Grand Avenue. The house once been a funeral parlor, and almost nightly, the husband would hear talking and other noise coming from the room next to him. He would check the room, only to find it silent and nothing out of place. After he met his wife, they purchased the large house on the south side and turned the Grand Avenue mansion into an office. One of the children of the family went to my school, and he claimed that their family had experienced all kinds of strange phenomena in the old mansion. One instance, a soda can was completely knocked off of a nightstand right next to a bed that he was sleeping on, and constantly they would hear footsteps upstairs. And the mother once said she was in the bathroom and the door suddenly flew open. All of the windows were closed, eliminating any chance of a drift. Another night, the family drove past the mansion, as they often would, to make sure it was secure. Remember, nobody lived there at this time. It was only used as an office. As they drove past the house, they noticed every single light in the house was turned on. They went in, turned out the lights, and left. They checked with everyone who had a key to the house, and everyone assured them they had not turned on the lights. It is claimed that the atmospheric pressure in the backyard is different from the rest of the area. These stories were all interesting to me, but I still had some skepticism until one year, the family was going to go on vacation to visit relatives in Texas, and they asked my mother and me if we would watch the mansion for them while they were gone. Keep in mind, neither my mother nor I knew anything about the house, including the strange phenomena. So Monday morning, we got to the house and settled in. My mother, a school teacher at the time, was grading some homework assignments, and I, only about 5 at the time, was fast asleep on the couch. My mother got thirsty, so she stacked the homework assignments in a pile, went to the kitchen for some water, came back, only to find the paper strewn all over the table and on the floor. I was still fast asleep, and there were no open windows. Later on that day, she was in the kitchen again, and she heard me crying in the other room. She ran in to see what was wrong, but again, I was fast asleep. I did not appear to be restless, as if crying in my sleep. Later on that week, we both occasionally would hear footsteps walking around upstairs. It is a very old house, as you can see from the attached photo, so naturally, the floors are very creaky. These were definitely solid footsteps. We constantly went upstairs after hearing the steps, only to find the place empty. After the family returned from their vacation, my mother had mentioned to them the phenomena we experienced. They laughed and explained to us that it happens all of the time. They described the entity as a friendly ghost who likes to play pranks on people, hence the bathroom door flying open. The family eventually moved to Texas and sold the mansion to somebody else. I never returned to ask the new owners if they have experienced anything. Perhaps somebody around this area might want to.
I've been looking for a site for a long time where I can outline an experience that I had back in the 80s. It remains extremely vivid in my mind, as if it happened only hours ago. Last year, while camping in Vermont, I related the story to a couple who was camping next to us. They were from Massachusetts and told me about Freetown State Forest and what was going on there. They also told me that what I had described was what was disturbing people there. She called it a pukwudgie, or guardian of the forest. Let's go back to the story. I'm now 48, and I live in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. My great-grandmother, on my father's side, was full-blood Lenni Lenape. When I was younger, I lived near Philadelphia, in a town called Flowertown. I used to practically live in Fairmount Park, Wissahickon Creek, within the boundaries of the city of Philadelphia. The park is about 20 miles long, and about 6 miles wide at the most. You never know that you are in a major city when you're in there. It's a steep valley, and there used to be a ton of mills there. The park has a long historical past, and had involvement in the Revolutionary War. It was also sacred land to the Delaware tribe of the Lenni Lenape. There is a council rock there, among other things. I have been there many times, and there are many great places. There is Devil's Pool, where the Native American legends say that the Great Spirit defeated the Dark Spirit, and an imprint was left on the rock. There is the Ledge, which is a great fishing spot, secluded and out over the water. One of my favorite spots is called Mom Rinker's Rock. It is a finger of rock that sticks out from a hillside deep in the park. There's only one way on or off, and the drop on all sides may not be sheer, but they are steep and treacherous. On the top of the rock is an old statue of William Penn. Engraved in the plinth is the word toleration. One night, during the summer of my 26th year, 4 friends and I went to Toleration before it got dark. We sat on the rock until late, talking and enjoying the peacefulness. All of the guys with me I knew well. One, named Stan, was always seeing stuff, and it was a joke of sorts. One, named Andy, never believed anything unless he could touch it. Anyway, we were out there for a while, and Stan came back from relieving himself and announced to me that there were eyes in the bushes. I was talking to Andy and was closest to the land side of the rock. I laughed, but eventually I looked. Sure enough, there were 2 human-sized points of greenish yellow light. After about 10 seconds, they blinked. Twice. I asked Andy if he saw them, and he said he did. About 15 to 20 seconds later, the owner of the eye stepped into the moonlight. I'll tell you, I never saw this before and never saw it again, except in dreams. But I've been trying to figure out what it was since that day. He, or it, was about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, and he was squatting. In fact, he walked in a squat. He moved that way until he was about 12 to 15 feet from me. Then he stopped and just stared at us. I could see the shadow he was making on the ground, in the moonlight, and he wasn't transparent, although at times he seemed to shimmer. He looked wet. His hair was long and damp looking. His face was human, but his nose was long, almost over his upper lip. I couldn't see any teeth. His eyes were greenish yellow. He was wearing a shirt that looked as though it was made of sticks, and I think he was wearing a loincloth of sorts, but it may have just been his skin too. His feet seemed bare, but there weren't any discernible toes. His hands were human, but his fingers were very long also. One hand was held like a fist, with a stick in it that only protruded from the bottom of his hand, and there were beads and feathers hanging from the end. The other hand was empty, and he kept opening and closing it. He didn't make any sound at all, not even on the dry ground. I have no idea how long we were like that, but I do know that he was looking at me, because my friends, including Andy, not only commented on it later, but they were looking from him to me while we were in our standoff. After a while, he left, but he didn't walk away. He moved to his left, all right. The path that he chose was directly off the rock, but he didn't descend. He just moved through the air, and we could see him passing through the trees until he was out of sight. Needless to say, none of us moved for a very long time. When we did, no one wanted to lead or be in the back. We eventually made it back to the car without incident, although, just before we got there, a shadow moved across our path. No one was frightened at all on the rock, only afterward. We never went back there at night again. I had dreams about it for years and did some research, but never found much. I went there with a friend on the summer solstice this year with my camera. I had saved some soil from that night and brought it with me. Nothing appeared, although there seemed to be a theme that day. Everything we saw had red in it. Leaves, fungus, stray debris, and a passing balloon on the wind. We even saw a scarlet tanager, which is a very rare bird for our area. I took a lot of pics and checked them all. When I got back and displayed them on the PC, one had orbs in it, which is strange during the day. Mom Rinker was a tavern owner in Philadelphia during the British occupation in the 1770s. She used to listen to the British officers talk in a tavern. Then she would pass the information, in balls of yarn, down to Jacob Levering, who was camped in the creek area. That is how the rock got its name, In later years, the rock was also the scene of a report from a mill owner that stated Mom Rinker was a witch, and he saw her there on the rock in the moonlight, using it as a place where she would start her broomstick rides. This could very well be a typical report of what I saw, except from a man in the 18th century. Anyway, I've shared my story with a few people over the last 22 years, one of whom was in Vermont. I was staying at Jamaica State Park there, which had its own reputation with the Native Americans and the massacre there. She told me that I just described a pukwudgie. That was the first time that anyone had the slightest recognition of this guy, much less a name. I've always been pretty much in tune with things since I was very young. I've had more than a few experiences with various places, including Gettysburg, and some of the revolutionary sites around here. But that is another story. I was reading through the activity spots in my home state of Michigan, and was surprised to see a mention of Lincoln K-12 school in Warren, Michigan. I was a student at Lincoln myself for a couple of years in the mid-80s, and I had almost forgotten about the stairway accident your poster mentioned, in light of 2 other brutal deaths that happened while I was enrolled. The accident to which the other poster refers happened somewhere around 1980. The story, as I heard it, was that a boy had fallen down the stone stairwell leading to the 2nd floor and suffered severe head trauma, dying a gruesome death on the hallway floor. I was always glad I didn't have to go upstairs for classes, because that stairwell just freaked me out. Then, in late 1985 or early 1986, a boy with hemophilia was running around the 5th grade classroom and horseplaying with other students while the teacher was out making copies. He took a nasty spill into a desk and bled to death internally before help could arrive. There was always something eerie about that room after that. I had to go there for math classes, and it always made me feel very claustrophobic. A short time later, maybe spring of 1986, a man was shotgunned to death at close range and in broad daylight just across Federal Street, which borders school property. Another man pulled a car over to the curb and shot him, apparently for sleeping with his wife. I was in the 3rd grade classroom at the times of both incidents, and the murder scene was maybe 50 feet from where I sat. The spot where the hemophiliac boy died was maybe 20 or 30 feet away from my seat, with the stone stairwell maybe 20 or 30 feet beyond that. I haven't really thought about any of these things in a while, and it never occurred to me to connect them in my mind, but there might be something to it.
Hey Phantom, so first of all, the first 2 days of October, I've released yet another video for your viewing pleasure, so give it up for this channel for actually having content on it. Yeah! Anyway guys, thank you so much again for tuning in. I know we're getting really excited for October, at least I am, and the energy I hope is like felt throughout the video, and you guys are really living it up. But really, thank you so much for just being a good sport and just, you know, dealing with my shenanigans. And I wanted to thank Goodnight Goosebumps for joining me on this collaboration. So, plenty of ghostly content for your viewing pleasure, plenty of excitement just in general. And yeah, let's just, you know, make this video the greatest it can be. So leave a like, comment on this video, it really helps. And just let me know what you thought of all the stories and what you thought of me getting videos out for the 2nd time. I'm just really excited, guys. But, you know, with October just being here, it's like the best thing that you could ever have happen to you in your life. Anyway, guys, I gotta go, but remember, please share the video, subscribe if you're new, and just, you know, let me know in the comment section below what you're doing or whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's go. Bye-bye. I am cringy now. Bye-bye. Love you, and I'll see you in the next video.